Good morning, Patriots, and welcome to the Patriots Prayer Podcast. I'm your host, Eddie Smith, and today we are going to be airing part 2 of our interview with ex-FBI agent turned whistleblower, David Baumblatt. Now, David has a story to tell, and you should listen because it affects both you and me and every American citizen. What you see happening to President Trump right now currently, where you have DAs running on the premise of investigating a man, not investigating a crime. These are things you typically hear in a third world country. You have Dan Bongino, as well as Dinesh D'Souza, coming out with a movie called The Police State. And it's no accident that these things are happening. And if we don't hurry up and do something to save our republic, it is definitely going down the tubes. And yes, a police state is something that a lot of people tend to think that we are currently residing inside of. So with that said, no further ado, let's get on to the interview with David Baumblatt. So let me ask you a question, and this is in my investigations of way back after 9/11. My interest was piqued in a lot of these things. We know Afghanistan is the most major importer of opium or opiates into the United States, in the world, right? This is their cash crop. This is how they fund all of everything they do over there currently. The Taliban, while in power, people can call them terrorist groups. They definitely rule with an iron fist. They don't have, there's no feminism. There's none of that kind of stuff going on under the Taliban rule, but they would not allow the people to grow poppy. They wouldn't allow the farmers to grow poppy. And so the opium export out of Afghanistan was nil. There was a guy by the name of Michael Rupert, who was an ex-agent as well. And he was dead set on the fact that there were government entities that were complicit in bringing that opium into the United States. And he had tons of documentation to back that up. And like you, he can't come back in the country. He was kicked out of the country. Now he's a guy who was born here, and he still can't come back to the country. And he had just an amazing story to tell, and all of this kind of lines up. And then you see like movies like American Gangster, which is based on a true story that talks about drugs being brought back by our own military into the United States. So I guess my question is that do you see that kind of corruption? I mean, from an insider's perspective, I mean, is this really who we have protecting us?
You're 100% correct. Let me rephrase this so that people could understand. When I was in the military and I was in the FBI, at the time, I still thought the government was different than the corporations. It was separate. And we're not a profit-seeking entity. You know, it's duty, honor, country, we're the government. But what I realized is the government is really just implicated underneath the corporations, and that we really don't serve the American citizens. We serve the corporations. And I just realized that everything in the government, even though you think they're doing stuff, so even the FBI, when there's a case involved, there's political influence. There could be corporations influence. And I didn't realize this. I thought the government, it's like a cop, right? You think a cop's a cop. There's no money involved. He just does his job. Trust me, as you go up higher, we are a corporation, America. We're not a government anymore. We're a corporation. And everything is about the money. Because again, I realized part of the reason why my case got shut down is you got to go back. Radical Islamic terrorism, the Afghanistan war, the Iraq war, the FBI agents that were working those cases, oh my God, money going there, because that's where the money is. So I guess what I would say to the American people is our country, to include our government, it's truly bought and sold. And I do think one of the reasons, and I go back to Donald Trump, everyone's jealous of him. You can see a lot of people in the left, he's a rich, elite billionaire. My theory is, probably Trump needs to be a billionaire, because if he didn't have that money, he'd probably have to work for the corporation.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I loved it. It was so classic in the debate where he's sitting there with Jeb Bush on stage and he shushes him. I thought that was absolutely classic. And he says the reason why these people here are booing me is because they're all special interests.
I
These are
absolutely
all the
do.
guys that are funding all these people up here on stage. And he just went straight at the throat of everyone on that stage, Rubio, Jeb Bush, and the likes all the way down the line. And you got to understand that the Bushes, for one, they are not some conservative family. Prescott Bush was under investigation, and during World War II, they owned companies, Hamburg American Shipping Lines, Brown Brothers Harriman Bank, and their assets were frozen because they were funding Hitler during World War II.
Yeah.
So these are not the guys you think they are. And George Bush instrumental in creating the CIA. And then you find out that George Bush Jr., his one of his best friends, James R. Bath, whose name was redacted and then unredacted, and we know who he is now, was the money man for the Bin Ladens. These were the Bin Ladens were their buddies. They vacationed with them. In fact, after 9/11, the only people allowed to fly when there was no one in the air were the Bin Ladens, and they flew them out of this country back to their own.
And I think to reiterate to the American people about how I realize the government is basically just working for the corporations, the same thing happened to me when I went to China and I was working for the corporate. When I was in China, I was working for Boeing, and I was in charge, or not in charge, I was part of a project. I was part of the project that was the largest single overseas investment in the history of Boeing. The China factories, building factories in China. And the point is, I was in these meetings where I saw the executives from Boeing. Again, this is the military industrial complex, flying out from Seattle, our headquarters, going to these conferences with the Chinese government, very high level. You think these people were brothers, drinking, shaking, hugging. And I thought to myself, that doesn't look normal. And I just realized that we really are. You hear these conspiracy theories that the banks control us. Yeah. I'm telling you, I'm not going to doubt it. I really do. I think they just have so much influence that everything is about the money. And whoever has the money has the control. And I think America, we're just bought and sold. And that's the problem. We're going down this path. But I don't have faith anymore that our government, to include our military, is sort of independent from the corporations, and they have their own morality, and this is what they're going to do. They are so much easily influenced because their budget and everything comes from the politicians, and the politicians are bought and sold by the corporations.
So yeah, security is the guise through which we lose our freedoms, right? Which is, give me liberty or give me death, and that sort of thing is the opposing viewpoint of that. And this is exactly what happened with the Patriot Act. And of course, you can be free in a prison cell. Safe, I say, in prison cell, not free, but you're definitely safe. And so they're putting these prisons up, a brick at a time around us, and they come there are bricks put up every time there is a crisis. There's some more bricks in place, more legislation to take more freedoms away. And now a lot of people don't realize we do have in the United States right now, there are FEMA camps empty with just amazing amount of space to house, from my understanding, almost 1 million plus people. That Jesse Ventura went with I forget who it was, but he had a show called Conspiracy Theory, right? I mean, obviously, you look at these shows and you see them, and you take a lot of the things they say with a grain of salt, right? You say, okay, this may be for more entertainment purposes, but it turned out that the things that he was showing were very legitimate. And he went into a place that they termed a family center. I believe it was in Georgia in this one. And he walks up to the front door of this place that looks like a damn prison. It's got prison, gates up, but there are houses inside, playgrounds, and it just looks like a giant neighborhood, but inside of a prison. And it was called a family center. And he walks up, he knocks on the door, and says, "Hey, what is this? And why are there people in here?" Because there was a kid on the swing inside in the episode. And why are there people here? We can't tell you that. We can't. All these types. So remember when Hitler, when he rose to power, because what he was telling the people was that the people are starving in the streets, and he blamed the Jewish people for hoarding a lot of the assets at the time, the money and the wealth. And there were Germans literally starving in the streets. They were extremely poor. And so, of course, this guy spoke, and he was very charismatic, and he got the people under his spell. When he turned on the Jews, when he really turned, he put them in what he called family centers. And that's what he told That's what he told his population. They didn't know that these were internment camps and what he was doing in these camps, but they termed them family centers. And that's exact. I mean, and we see the same thing that Hitler did when he burned the Reichstag. He burned the Reichstag. He blamed terrorists. He blamed the terrorists. He set up Reich Security. We blame the terrorists. We set up Homeland Security. We're following the same playbook.
Yeah, I think the whole COVID thing is a good example. In fact, I ate my hat. I was in China during the COVID nightmare. If anyone watched my video 3 when I was working for Amazon. However, I had incorrectly argued with the Chinese saying in America, because in China they were taking away the freedoms. And I said, this will never happen in America, but it did. And I think what Americans should realize, that's kind of like a warning, like testing the waters of the American people. And I believe the American people failed miserably, meaning I really think people are sheep and, get the COVID vaccine. Oh, if you didn't get it, then you're a danger. But all the American people need to do is look back, whatever, a couple of years ago, and look how brainwashed we were on this, easily controlled, easily fought against each other. And that was just a COVID. Yep. I could tell you, I think dangerous times are coming.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that you had to have a mask on and be 6 feet apart and do all of these things was just made no sense at all. 0 sense. I likened it to this. Just take this as an example. If I told you tomorrow you couldn't come out of your house unless you wore a purple shirt, and everyone who didn't wear a purple shirt was basically a terrorist or dangerous. I mean, it makes no sense, but that's essentially what they did. People fell right in line. They didn't question. They didn't read for themselves. And anyone who did read for themselves and anyone who investigated these issues themselves wasn't even given, any kind of time to speak. They weren't given any platform. But I think there were so many people on the other side of these issues that it became such a hot topic. Now, all of a sudden, you see a lot of news organizations giving, equal time and whatnot to people who stand on the other side of this issue. But just recently, Facebook changed their policy to go back to not allowing information, or what they term misinformation, about the COVID vaccine, where I can tell you from my personal experience, my wife works in the medical industry, David, and she was forced in order to keep her job to get that vaccine. Upon getting the second shot of the vaccine, in which I preached against, I say quit. Honest to God, I say quit. About 7 days after that shot, she is now deaf in her right ear. And the vaccine injury that she incurred, because it was done under the emergency use authorization of that vaccine, the insurance companies don't want to pay for the hearing implant she needs in order to try to correct the issue, because it was done under emergency use authorization. And there are so many vaccine injuries to date. This poison and this gene therapy is what it is, that they're using. It was created with mRNA technology, which was developed with CRISPR. So people like Christine Northrup, Peter McCullough, as well as Dr. Scott Jensen, who I had the opportunity to have a great conversation with. These are world-renowned doctors who put their reputations on the line to come out and explain to people that what they're being told is not true. And yet, I mean, they tried to cancel anyone who spoke to these people or gave them a platform. Joe Rogan interviewed McCullough, and they tried to remove him from Spotify. It didn't work. But this is the level to which they'll go to stop people from going against the official narrative, including the scientists that were that did the experiment, that did the test on the vaccine, or on the virus rather. They expelled or kept out of the loop the director of the CDC, and there were 2 other doctors on the other side of this issue from the WHO, and they were having weekly calls, and during those weekly calls, I forget the guy's name who headed up the CDC, Red, I forget his name. However, he essentially said these two doctors said that this did not occur naturally. It did not just happen by terms of evolution, and that this was their official story. Well, they changed their official story, and upon changing it, they both got $9 million grants for research from the NIH. So basically, get in line, toe the official narrative line, and if you do, we'll reward you. But if you don't, we'll cancel you.
Yeah, I looked at that in a couple ways. The first thing is, my theory is people who have never worked for the government, I think they trust the government more. People who have worked for the government, I don't trust the government. So I think that might be one of the areas where people just believe what the government says because they're
we
like,
want
well,
to. We want to believe it. We want to believe that there are good guys out there. We want to believe that this is the land of the free, the home of the brave, and our government is representative of the people, and they believe in freedom, and they're really trying to help. We want to believe all those things. We live in a state of denial in order
I
to.
really do. And then the second is well, what about freedom? Meaning, I never got the COVID. I never even contemplated that. I was so convinced. I never even contemplated getting the vaccine. So my point is, if you want to get the vaccine, go for it. But the people who didn't, there was like a persecution against them.
Sure.
There was just, it's like, leave these people alone. If you want to get a couple booster shots, you could boost your whole life up for all we care. But there, and then the third is, this comes from psychological operations. If the government did the opposite, if the government said, American people, we've got COVID, we've got this vaccine, but it's only in limited trials, and we only can give it to the certain elite people per se. They know how they could word it. To the rest of you people, we can't give it to. Sorry, we'll get you. Man, people will be fighting over it. But when the government gives you money, gives you incentive, gives you like an ice cream cone, take the virus,
Krispy Kreme donut and a vaccine.
Yeah. I mean, it was weird. You know what was happening in other countries? There was in European countries. This is disgusting. They had it in brothels because prostitution's legal in Europe, where they're giving clients free sex for the vaccine. This is almost demonic.
They had in Vegas, they had we have legalized or recreational marijuana now, and they had their event called Joints for Jabs. So you go down and get the vaccine, and they would give you marijuana as a reward for doing it.
Yeah,
I'm not that gullible at all.
Yeah, to the American people, if the government does anything for you, trust me, they don't do anything for free. They could care less. But everything was lining up to me. But guess what? I was not surrounded, but there were enough people. Oh, you're crazy, David. Or I was putting their lives in danger because I wasn't vaccinated.
Sure.
I think the leadership lesson to the American people is, look what happened in COVID. Look how much we were fooled and just oppressed by our government, and get ready because round 2's coming. If you thought that was it, and hopefully, but I think history repeats. I don't think people look what's happening now. We could talk about Israel, but remember with 9/11, we're like, oh my God, emotions, Patriot Act. You're going to watch it. It's going to be happening here in America. There's going to be a terrorist attack, and boom, there's going to be another Patriot Act coming our way.
So let me ask you this, because I want to go on to some of those more current issues with Israel and that sort of thing, but
in Ukraine or whatever. Absolutely.
Exactly. And I think that's, obviously emotions are very high right now over these things, and they got a lot of very large Christian population in the United States that feels a certain way toward Israel. Like me, it's not my country, but it damn sure feels like it. But
yeah,
we're seeing a lot of these things that take place. All of the issues that we covered thus far, kind of trying to pull the veil back off of people's eyes so that they see the true face of government, and maybe don't fall into the two-party paradox and start supporting people instead of parties. And this needs to be the way things are. There are people that you agree with, people you disagree with, issues you agree with them on, and issues you don't agree with. As I told you, I'm trying to have this conversation with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Hopefully, within the next month or so, I get to do that. We're trying to work that out right now. I'm not a Democrat by any stretch of the imagination, nor do I believe in any form of socialism or any of the reparations, which he is absolutely for. But he says enough other things that I do agree with, that I think that I'm able to sit down and have a conversation with this guy and exchange of ideas. So What do you think took place in the United States? What was the turning point that took us from a place where you could be a Democrat, I could be a Republican, and I could say, let's go to lunch? And what happened to that?
Yeah. So I think a lot of it has to do with immigration demographics. I'm from New York, but I don't really consider New York my home. So in my leadership theory, I put faith, family, freedom, because in leadership, you have to be able to define who are you or what are we? What is America, right? That's a good question. What is America? I believe 100 years ago, that answer would be more simplified. Now, is anything not American? Really? I mean, you can't even argue. I mean, you could say America's communism, right? So that's the problem. In my philosophy, I say faith, family, freedom, faith. We are a Judeo-Christian country. Are
That's
we
right.
still that? Maybe not, but that's our roots. Second, we are a European country. That's our roots. Are we European still? Probably not, but that's our roots. Freedom. That's why we had a Revolutionary War. How's freedom going? It's going down. But the part of leadership is you have to define first. This is where non-Western countries have a strength. If I asked you right now to describe what is a Chinese person, a Chinese citizen, I bet your options or variables would be much less than if I asked you what's an American. Literally, what's not an American? Everything's an American these days. It's the kitchen sink. That's dangerous.
Yeah.
If you
There's no
ask,
standard.
there's
There's
no
no
standard.
standard.
You could be anything now. You could say I don't know, I'm a Satanist. I think pedophilia is good. Okay, well,
And
that's
that's where
America.
I know I'm going to sound crazy for saying this, but it's true. We have taken freedom too far and we've misused it. By allowing people to march down the street waving flags and in solidarity with Hamas, we are now criminals are the new victims. And we had teens in Chicago swarm the streets, pull people out of their apartments, loot and riot and do all sorts of things. And the mayor said, don't call them a mob. They were we saw a man jump on stage with the famous comedian David Chappelle and try to stab him on stage. That man was free that night to walk the street.
We don't have a value system anymore.
We're not prosecuting criminals.
Yeah,
We're not prosecuting them.
Because like I said, if you're going to learn leadership, you've got to learn the balance between morality and legality. It's the chicken and egg, morality and legality. But let's just look at morality right now. You can. Now, here's something about China. They say China's an atheist country, sort of. But if you go into Taoism, Confucianism, and Buddhism, there's still, doctrines of this is right, this is wrong. I don't think we have this anymore in America, because if you got into
everything's relative.
Everything, because we want to be liberal. We don't want to offend everyone, because really, if you think about it, communism, and I define China more as fascism, and that's another conversation. But the point is, if you want,
well, that's what the left is as well. They're actually fascists, but they want to term everyone else to be fascist. It's gaslighting. Believe like we do, think like we do, and we'll leave you alone. If you don't, we're going to attack you. And so the tolerance and the freedoms and they just don't exist.
And I think that's the problem in America. We're losing our identity. But if you ask me about our foreign policy, I'll just do it real. We'll go in depth, but I would just say this. I view America as a Judeo-Christian country, European heritage that values freedom. Mm-hmm. Therefore, now don't quote me on this all the way, but if there's a country that's Judeo-Christian, that's European, this would be Israel, this would also be Ukraine, I think, then you should definitely have a natural bond. Now, I'm not saying we're going to be in a full alliance where we give them money and put troops on the ground, but I would say a country like Ukraine and Israel, there should be a more normal bond than a country like China. You know what I'm saying? China is going to be like, what the hell is China?
Well, we have more common ground. At least there are things. Well, we should have more common ground. There should be more things we have in common than not, even though societally we are different. But we do have more in common with European countries than we would have, let's say, with China. That wasn't always the case. But I mean, we could talk about the history of China and the evolution of China to where it is now with essentially the government is God. They have currently well over 1 million people in internment camps.
Oh,
They
absolutely.
don't allow the free worship of deities, no matter what it is. Even they had and I work with and I interview all the time. I have him on here all the time. Nat Hung, who works with who works at Epic Times, and he's very big on communism being the biggest threat to freedom in the free world. And he does a lot of groundwork on laying out how it is that communism is gaining these footholds and what are the tricks that it uses in Marxism and funding, creating infrastructures. For instance, China's building dams in some third world countries with proprietary technology. Yeah. And who's gonna supply the parts, the software upgrades, and that sort of thing? It's going to be China. So either toe the line, or we're going to cut your electricity off, or you're not going to have running water.
And like I said, the key though to China is we got to look at our corporations. You got to look at our corporate. If it wasn't for, remember, we built this Frankenstein. We've got to look at our core. And let's face it, Americans still want to buy cheap stuff made in China.
Absolutely,
we're a corporation. We got to look at it from an economic stand. But what I would say is this. So, and I've been very adamant about this. The Ukraine war, 100% stay out of it. 100% stay out of it. Now,
I want to get into that because I have an insight on the Ukraine war that I would really like to get your insight on. Before we do that, I'm going to take a quick pause, and we'll come right back. Patriots, we're back with David Baumblatt, ex-FBI agent turned whistleblower, and like I said before the break, we want to get into some of the current issues, right? So we're talking about Ukraine, talking about Israel. We're talking about the state of affairs in the United States, from Harvard, Yale, University of Washington, UC Berkeley, and others, the things that we see happening here. But let's just knock one domino down at a time, starting with Ukraine. Can you give me some insight into Ukraine? How do you see this conflict playing out? What do you think the cause of it is? And bigger question for you on the other end of this is, we immediately saw everybody yell ceasefire with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Ceasefire, please, ceasefire. I haven't heard one damn person yet say ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine and try to put an end to this. In fact, I believe even when Putin tried to say, hey, let's sit down, these are the terms of which I will stop this, he was just ignored. Why is that on this side of the political aisle, and in a completely different way in Israel?
I think a lot of it has to do with influence, and I'll compare Israel, China, and Russia all together. So I think starting off, and I'm a proud Jewish American, but Israel has a lot of influence in America. It is what it is, and that's a whole conversation we could get into. But let's compare specifically China and Russia, and again about influence. And that is, China, is about the second largest economy in the world. It could possibly be the first largest economy in the world. And our corporations make a lot of money from China. Hence, our politicians make a lot of money from China. So China is handled more with kitty gloves. Russia, the economy of Russia is about the size of the state of Texas or the country of Spain. Russia is actually not a very rich country, and their products and services really that they, energy products and wise, we don't make that much money from our corporations, meaning the politicians don't make it. But if you look at Russia as a whole or China as a whole, they're both enemies of America. I mean, they're kind of in a similar fashion, but Russia has much worse of a name. China, not so bad. I say follow the money on that. Now, if we're going to look at the conflict, though, what's happening in Israel, it is apples and oranges, because Russia and Ukraine, just like China and Taiwan, there's similarities of ethnicity, of historical land, and they look at them differently. Trust me, the Chinese look at the Taiwanese as their brothers. They disagree with them, but they're their brothers. The Russians look the same way with the Ukrainians. Israel and Hamas and the Palestinians, my God, that is just two people who just don't get along for so many reasons. But the point being, as I say again, Ukraine, you could say, is part of the Russian influence. The same thing like Taiwan is part of China's influence. And the question to Americans is, what's in it for us? I mean, you really got to ask ourselves, what is in it for us? And I've made it clear, Taiwan and Ukraine, stay out of it. The Cold War ended. NATO should have been, and I was worried, and here's the story. So when I was in NATO, so I served in NATO both when I was in Kosovo, and I was stationed what's called the U.S. Army European Headquarters in Germany. So I graduated at headquarters. I was, when I graduated West Point, I was stationed in Germany. And the first thing that I learned very quickly when I was in NATO, NATO is the American European military. And what do I mean by that? If America stops spending money on NATO, if America stops giving leadership
I'm in
to
favor of
NATO,
that, by the way. The
and
USSR doesn't exist anymore. I don't think there's a reason to have NATO.
absolutely, and if America doesn't give tanks and airplanes, in fact, I was stationed similar to like my name is Baumblatt. There's a base called Baumholder in Germany. It is the largest concentration of U.S. troops outside of America. It's in Germany, called Baumholder, Germany. That's the name of the base. That's where I was stationed. And I'm telling you, we spend so much money. So the point being is Ukraine and Russia are obviously in Europe. It is time for our European allies like Germany, like France, like Britain to start taking charge, save the American taxpayer money, save American lives, whatever you want to call it. But it is time for Europeans to start doing their own dirty laundry. And so now, whether they want to get involved or not, like I said, but I think to the American people, this is a war machine for America where the military industrial complex needs to make money. When Russia collapsed, when the Soviet Union collapsed, NATO should have been disbanded. It's done the opposite.
Immediately.
We've expanded. So I look at the Russia conflict in Ukraine, very simple. It's in Europe. It's time for the Europeans.
It's a NATO conflict is what it is.
Let them do it. And I would stay out of it.
Yep.
Israel's a little more common. We could continue to talk about Ukraine, but Ukraine is as simple as it is. I say it's in Europe. It is time for the American. I see this all the time, though, everything. We have homeless people in America. We have homeless veterans. We have so many problems in America. I don't understand why America still wants to spend money overseas. It doesn't make sense.
We don't.
We have so many. Yeah, it's the elites. It's the elites.
If you took a vote today on spending on all these foreign proxy wars, that is what Ukraine is a proxy war. If you took an up-down vote of every citizen of the United States, you would find that would fall flat immediately. People don't want to spend money in that war, and you definitely don't want to back Zelensky over Putin. They're the same person.
Yeah,
they're not different.
Something I tell the American people that when I was living overseas, just like you say, people from overseas are brainwashed, and I'm not going to argue with that. Americans were also brainwashed, and that is, we have it indoctrinated in us that if a country is not a democracy, it gives us a right to go to war. Just go to war. And it just to the point of this Ukraine
nation building.
Ukraine is a corrupt country. I say, let them figure it out. Let Russia figure it out. And to the American people, you've got to look at our report card. We're not doing a very good overseas foreign policy with these military expeditions. We don't have a good track record. So for Ukraine and Russia, it's very simple. I say stay out of it and let the Europeans start taking charge.
Well, it goes even deeper. Well, you have Putin, who puts his political opponents in prison, right? We all know this. Alexander Litvinenko was assassinated.
It's corrupt.
An ex KGB guy, Alexander Litvinenko, was assassinated. They poisoned him with radiation. Everyone saw that. And because he exposed what was going on with Putin and what he was doing in Russia, and he was basically a whistleblower. And now you have Zelensky, who banned outright his opposition, and it put most of them in prison after his election. And now he's got a prescribed way for those who worship, God in whatever form they do in Ukraine. You can only do it the way that he tells you to. His media is no longer free. And he didn't want the people in Ukraine to be able to use the internet. He didn't want people showing exactly what was really happening over there. All of the telltale signs of a dictator. Every single one of those things is exactly the reason why we say we don't like Putin. But this is exactly what Zelensky is doing. And you have to be able to connect the dots here. Zelensky, his candidacy was bankrolled by a guy named Igor Kolomoisky. Kolomoisky was He owned Pravat Holdings, which is Pravat Bank, and he owned Burisma Holdings, which was Burisma Energy. We know the Hunter Biden story. $57,000 a month is kind of a bribe in order to get any of the bad publicity out of the way, which is what they did with Shokin. They wanted Shokin out of the way so that Burisma could be listed on the New York Stock Exchange. So that was the reason why they brought Hunter on board, and Daddy came in and did exactly that for them. They had the prosecutor fired, son of a bitch, the famous line, the real quid pro quo. And it didn't stop there, because now we have audio phone calls between Poroshenko and Joe Biden where he is literally telling on himself. He's telling, we need it, but I don't want Trump to start pouring money into the economy and then before he gets sophisticated enough to know the details, I want you to close the bank. He's literally scheming on the phone with Poroshenko, who later on says that Oshenko is working with the FBI. And I just need to know if he's really working with them. Just tell me, because he's scared that the FBI is after him. And you have Biden on the phone, basically reassuring him that the investigation is over. And all of this is public information now. The recordings are out there. And it's nuts to me that the U.S. media continues over and over and over again to say there is no evidence. There is no evidence. And the fact that they say there is no evidence, to me, is the biggest evidence that there is for widespread corruption, and the fact that there's truly not a free media. In fact, I'm going to play one of these phone calls here. Have you heard any of these phone calls?
No.
All right, listen, I'll play one. First of all, let me know if you can hear the audio. Can you hear the audio?
Nope, not yet.
All right, here, let me try this a different way. I'm gonna throw it up on the monitor, and let's see if it doesn't software doesn't allow it to. Apologize for the dead air, people, but this is very important, and I really do want to get David's take on these phone calls. So, David, can you hear it now?
Yeah, I can hear it.
Assuming that there is a new government and a new prosecutor general, I am prepared to do a public signing of the commitment for the $1 billion.
And despite of the fact that we didn't have any corruption charges, we don't have any information about he doing something wrong, I especially asked him, it was the day before yesterday, I especially asked him to resign.
Congratulations on installing the new prosecutor general. It's going to be critical for him to work quickly to repair the damage Shokin did. And I'm a man of my word. And that now that the new prosecutor general's in place, we're ready to move forward in signing that new $1 billion loan guarantee.
So that's just one, David. That's just one of the many phone calls that Biden made. There's another one that I have where Biden literally is calling Hunter Biden, and he says to him, "Get the red cell phone. They're not going to get off my." Then this is a quote. They're not going to get off my ass about these documents. There are about 5 other places that I know they are. Get the red cell phone and call Barack and Michelle and tell them that Operation Crash and Burn is a go. And this is not bullshit. This is on the level. These are I heard these phone calls first on Dan Bongino's show, and I went and I immediately got copies of all of them. And they are telling. I mean, they are absolutely telling. And when you hear these phone calls, you immediately realize how big the swamp really is, because our media is lying to people and telling people there is no evidence. And this guy is, bar none, the most corrupt president to ever hold office ever. His grandchildren got money from China, Ukraine, Russia, Romania. He's corrupt as can be.
So I think to the audience, and we'll address it step by step. The first thing I would say is, every time that we want to get in these countries because we say they're corrupt and we want to make them better, there's corrupt countries everywhere. So we're like, well, we gotta worry about this. I mean, we're gonna go to Africa. So there's countries everywhere that are corrupt. So what are we gonna save the world? Number one. Number two, the whole point about us trying to uphold democracy is allowing that country to decide how they want to govern themselves internally, how they want. And we will not unethically or illegally interfere, which this is. Even in a private case, this would be FCPA, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. I mean, corruption's all there. So it goes back to the American people. It's interesting. There's a story in the FBI, and that is, if you really think about Hollywood, you actually think about the job that I was in, foreign counterintelligence or counterterrorism. It's more Hollywood. Mm-hmm. However, there's another department in the FBI, and my buddy worked it, and we talked, and it's public corruption. And so this is a part of the FBI that investigates congressmen, senators, and
the IA of politics.
Yeah. So, it doesn't sound that sexy as foreign counterintelligence, counterterrorism. But my buddy was telling me, and he couldn't tell me all this stuff, but he would say, David, if you think what you guys are working, terrorism or intelligence, would make the news, that would shake it, you would not believe what happens here. And he goes, some of the stuff we're allowed to investigate, some of the stuff we're not. And I think to the American people, it's obviously common sense. What is more shocking? Corruption found in China, corruption found in Ukraine, corruption found in Russia, or corruption found in your own home country that your tax money's paying for. And
you familiar with Jordan Peterson?
Yes.
Okay. Jordan Peterson has a saying that I absolutely love: clean your room.
Yeah, exactly. And this is something too. I hear these politicians, they always want to either talk bad about these corrupt countries or save these countries, right? We got to get involved, or China's corrupt. But it's like our house is falling apart in America.
Yeah.
And we want to save everyone, but there's people in America unemployed. We have our own, and I say it over and over again. The rats are already in the house, our house. Like, why are we constantly worried about these corrupt countries overseas when we have so many problems here? Well, the issue is, it's because the elites, meaning who really won in the Afghanistan war? The elites, the military-industrial complex, the generals. It's the same thing in Ukraine. Who's winning in Ukraine? Not the American public. We're losing money. I mean, we're not. So it comes back again. Our country is also corrupt, but that's the one thing that also opened my eyes when I lived overseas, because we're indoctrinated in America that we're a democracy, that we're America, that all these other countries are corrupt, but not us. But you've got to ask ourselves, our foreign policy is really geared at putting money in the hands of the elites, the politicians. And it's really, so to the American people, what exactly is our foreign policy? And I think the American people, they feel like they're widgets in a wheel. They don't have any influence, they have any control, until a guy like Donald Trump came along. They said, well, I can vote for him. But he's absolutely right. And that doesn't mean you have to be an absolute isolationist. I'm not saying that. But man, we are overly extended.
Yeah, everything in moderation, right? I mean, we all bitch about and complain about socialism that are on the right. And then they think that our standards are so far, that we're fascist. So that's the argument. When in fact, in a society, in a good functional society, you are going to have some aspects of it that will tend to, appear to be a little more socialistic in some way, shape, or form. There's got to be some touch of that. That's the heart of the government at that point, right? That's the conscience. And then the head or the brains of it will be more conservative and that sort of thing. And I think there's a balancing act that just the extreme in any direction is the issue. It's not that they because they can completely coexist. But the extreme on the right or the extreme on the left to any degree is just, that's the issue, the extremes. And they use those extremes in order to control us and keep us separated. Right. I watched an interview not long ago with some group that was on it was on a Bongino episode as well. And this group, and I wish I would have, I don't remember. He's got so many episodes. I wish I could go back and find this particular one. But this group, the entire premise of the group was to make sure that political organizations that exist on the right don't get footing. They don't get the following. They don't get to grow. They don't get to become anything that becomes a threat to them. So they push left-wing politics, but anyone on the right that starts to get any traction and gain any notoriety as an organization or as a group, their whole premise or goal is to make sure they don't have a platform or they don't find one another. And it's illegal what they're doing and how they're doing it. And they even stated in the interview, we know it's illegal, but we're working with the FBI. And it was like this kind of quick sentence that he said and just left it and no one said anything. Like, hold up, wait, go back. Didn't you hear him just say that this is an illegal operation that they're engaged in and they're doing it with the FBI? And he said it on TV like it didn't even matter. They're saying the quiet part out loud now, and nothing's happening. Nobody's saying anything. They that brazen? like Joe Biden saying they're going to blow up the pipeline between Russia and Germany 2 weeks before it actually happened, said that we'll end the pipeline, and then when it actually happened, he tried to say he didn't do it. Are we that brazen?
I actually do think that, and that is because, and this is with the FBI, this is with their government. I believe Joe Biden gave an interview a couple days with some mainstream media where they said, "Can we fight a two-front war?" Something like, "We're in Ukraine, we're in Israel. Can we do this?" And Joe Biden was like, "Absolutely, we're the strongest country on earth." And it reminded me of the Roman Empire, pride before the fall.
Absolutely.
And I really do think the FBI included, they are getting so much more brazen because look at me. They even know it. There's really nothing much you could do on par of some type of civil war or collapse. You're going to get crushed. I would say that what many people may or may not understand is the government, just like businesses and corporations, they want to grow, they want to expand, which they have been doing for decades and decades. What we have entered now, and I think we've been there for probably a couple decades or more, you are now seeing what it used to be. Private companies wanted to stay private. They wanted to stay away from the government. They didn't like the government. They wanted their freedom. But now these private companies turn into corporations, and these corporations realize for them to keep growing, they have to collude with the government contracts, changing the law. And so now what you're seeing is seeing truly the corporations and the government are one and the same. And now you're seeing the FBI.
That's the left as a whole, David. That's the left as a whole. These are the guys that used to fight the man, remember? They were so against the man. And now these are the same people. Take your vaccine. They have lost their way. They used to be the rebels, and now they are the system.
And it goes back to these overseas wars where the common everyday American citizen is realizing their life. I mean, that's probably a reason why our population is dropping. People can't afford to have kids. I mean, it goes on and on and on. Why are we constantly trying to save the world? The elites want to, because like I said, Afghanistan was a complete and utter failure for America. Not for the military-industrial complex, not for the politicians, not for the generals. It was an absolute win-win for them.
Yeah, because George Bush owned United Defense, and Halliburton had no bid contracts to go rebuild everything after they destroyed it. We actually had the fox guarding the henhouse. Under that same administration, we had Ben Bernanke is the head of the Treasury, and here's the guy that used to run the Federal Reserve. I mean, this was the most corrupt one. Well, I can't say that now with the Biden administration around anymore, but at the time, the most corrupt administration that I had ever saw.
Yeah, and like I said, I just don't think this is going to stop. And my political forecast is this. I hope Trump gets reelected, but you've got to remember, Trump was already the president for 4 years. If he gets elected again, I think, one, he could be taken out or he'll just be rolled aside. But I don't think the system as its entirety is going to change unless it gets catastrophic, because the people that run us are so powerful that I don't even think it's going to be solved the political ways. If people disagree, that's fine. But when I left America in 2010, how's America been going? It's getting worse and worse and worse. And I think people need to realize it's the corporations and the government that are destroying us.
Well, I liken it to a canoe. If you rock it real hard to the left, it's going to rock even harder to the right. You rock to the left, eventually it's going to flip upside down.
It's going to keep going, because I think we all agree, if you're, middle-aged or older, we never had these political, and that's another reason. I think if President Trump ran for an election back in the 90s, remember Ross Perot?
I loved Ross Perot. I absolutely love that guy.
Awesome. I think awesome guy. But back then, the tensions weren't high enough. But when Trump ran in 2016, it's getting worse and worse and worse. So a guy like Trump, who's a little radical, you could say, totally accepted. But if he would have ran in the early 90s or the 1980s, I think people would not have accepted him. As the system gets worse, people are going to get more radicalized. It's how it's going to be.
The other thing is when they were asking him to run in the 80s and 90s, I mean, he was doing Oprah interviews and all of these establishment types that hate him now. He was saying the same things back then, and they loved him until he started exposing.
Because now he's got power. He's got power. Let me talk too about the FBI. I'll give a story, and this relates to the January 6th. Now, remember, when I was in the FBI, our designation of a terrorist is probably what we can think of, which is, sort of happening now in Israel.
Can you elaborate on that? What would be the characteristics, or what would be utilized at the FBI to look at someone and say, hey, this person is a threat? What would be the bullet points? You give us.
Well, and here's the problem, and this goes to my investigation. If it's a criminal case, it has to be more black and white. Like, we think you're a drug dealer, we think you're a bank robbery. If we're going to designate you as a terrorist, what the American people don't realize, there's so much subjectiveness, which is dangerous. So right. I see you wearing a, what is it called, 1776, or don't tread on me. You've seen these sort of flags or propaganda. Sure. Is that a terrorist? I think many of us would agree, absolutely not. The FBI is. So the danger is, and let me make this point to illustrate this. When I was in the FBI, we designated radical Islamic terrorism. Now, after 9/11, I think most people would agree the people who flew the planes into the building are terrorists. Now, let's fast forward this to January 6th. Those people now, which are whatever, middle-aged, Republican, they're using the same designation as a terrorist. That is a radically different characterization. We've got, back in 2004, this Islamic radical terrorist who's, killed people. This is what we'd have to designate. Now, someone who illegally entered the Capitol building is a domestic terrorist?
Not just anyone, though. Only Republicans or conservatives that entered the Capitol building did they prosecute. You had many people that worked on the set of Stephen Colbert's late night show, who was obviously extremely liberal. None of them got prosecuted. I interviewed briefly Ashley Babbitt's mother, the one who was murdered on January 6th. I watched that video and I looked at the investigation done by the Epic Times, and all three of the people standing around Ashley Babbitt, the ones that were breaking the windows out, the ones who walked right up to the police officers guarding those doors and said, get out of the way, or we're just going to go through you. And those police officers abdicated their duties. They walked away, and they stood very close behind them, but they stopped guarding the doors. They immediately took weapons that they brought in. They had Trump hats on, little MAGA hats, but they weren't with the movement at all. They were there to agitate and do exactly what they did. And they started busting out the windows and that sort of thing. And here goes Ashley, and there's police officers directly behind her to her right. Close enough, big guys too, close enough to where they could just grab this little 4'9" woman who was barely over 100 pounds, had no weapons on her whatsoever. They could have just one-handed and pulled her, and that would have been the end of it. The coward on the other side of the door who shot her. Now, I'm not in any way, shape, or form advocating for the people that went inside the Capitol. I understand the emotion of the day, but I understand also that there were some clandestine operations taking place that day that agitated this situation very much so. And the reason why we know that is because they said so when they were asked about it. They wanted to know why we weren't showing all the video, and they said because it would have put a lot of their UCs in danger. And that was what their words were on the stand. But we have those three people that were standing around Ashley Babbitt were all Antifa. Every one of them. We know they were because they did their own podcast. They did interviews on CNN and everything after the fact. However, when they were on these interviews and they did their own podcast and they talked about this, no one gave a damn that they were in there. CNN didn't even have a harsh word at all to say about the fact that they threatened to assault a police officer or that they went in there and violently crashed through doors and did some of the things they did. They only wanted to focus on Ashley Babbitt. None of these people were prosecuted. None of them. Even they were doing the media rounds and they weren't prosecuted. You had Ray Epps, who was there that day advocating 2 days in a row, advocating for people to go inside the Capitol. We need to go inside. There's a scene where you see him whisper into the ears of some young men, and then they start crashing the gates through. And now he's finally indicted on a misdemeanor, where we have Enrique, forget his last name, from the Proud Boys, who just recently got 22 years in prison, and he wasn't even in the Capitol. And they paint these groups like Proud Boys, Patriot Prayer, not the Patriots Prayer, there's a different, but Patriot Prayer up in the Northwest with Joey Gibson as these supremacist groups or anti-government groups, and they're really not. They're absolutely not. And I know so many people in these groups, and they're not. These are Christian people. They're not white supremacists because they have every race and even homosexuals. And people are. They have the same ideology. They believe in the same things, no matter what walk of life they came from. So the media paints them in this light to make people think that they're bad actors. Hell, the girls from The View just likened the Proud Boys to Hamas. I thought that was the most stupid damn thing in the world. But I mean, when you were in the FBI, were these types of operations taking place? Were they looking at groups and then trying to misdirect or mischaracterize these people and then present that as to the public? And did this kind of stuff go on?
So absolutely, I'll tell you a story, but it's getting worse now. Like I said, when I was in, they tried to do it not as much political now. Now it's getting so politically subjective now that anyone could be it. So I'm going to give you an example. And before I do, I want to relate this to the East German Stasi, because the American public, this is what the FBI's turned into do. East Germany, God was dead, the family was dead, and they wanted to know everything and anything about the people. They wanted mothers to betray fathers and daughters and brothers. So families were betraying them because they wanted information. This is what's going to happen in America. So when I was in, I did actually a raid on a home of a counterterrorist. So a counterterrorism team needed an extra body. I was a breacher for a door. There was a search warrant, arrest warrant. This was obviously in America. This was a Middle Eastern home of Middle Eastern people. And anyway, I'll tell you what happened. But from a leadership standpoint, when I was done, it really gave me a bad taste in my mouth. And if you think that's bad, it's happening even worse now. What happened was, now, again, I'm not read into everything. Like you could imagine the FBI, they just said, hey,
compartmentalization.
Go in. Exactly. So I don't know all the details of what's going to happen.
Share as much as you can, though. If you can liken it to a specific case that you can say, or a group that you can actually name.
I'll go through it in terms of what it was. So again, this was in America. This was a counterterrorism case, a counterterrorism squad that had an arrest and a search warrant for a house. And we lined up, in the early morning hours. We had a stack in there, and we busted in the door, and we went in there. Again, I didn't know any of the details, but I'm about to tell you what happened because I was able to understand.
What state was this in?
This was California.
Okay.
So we're in California. We go into the house. Boom. There is a woman, a man. There's two more people. I mean, look Middle Eastern to me. And we go through the house, arrest everyone, search the house. People get taken out. And then there was the husband, or I'm giving it away. There was a man and a woman, and they're handcuffed on the couch. My job was to secure them, go through, make sure they didn't have any contraband weapons on them. They're handcuffed on the couch, and the FBI squad was searching the house. And I was told, okay, just secure them at the couch and just wait. So I was waiting there, and then the case agent, this is the person in charge of this, he comes there and he reads them both their rights. I thought it was weird because usually you separate them out. So I thought, this is weird why they're both there, but he reads them their rights and he says, I want to talk with you. And as soon as they were talking, I'm standing there, I could tell it's a husband and wife couple. You could just tell. And they're asking them questions back and forth, this and that. And it was about 15 to 20 minutes until the husband was like, hey, I want a lawyer. I want to stop talking. And at that time, he was like, okay, David, take this guy out to the car. We're going to take him to the federal building and book him. So I take him out to the car, book him in there. There's another agent there. And I forgot one of my, I think it was my handcuffs or a piece of equipment in the house. So I had to go back in the house to grab a piece of equipment. I go back in the house, and the wife, she's unhandcuffed. She's in a very easy talking position to the agent, and they're strategizing what they're doing. She's a paid informant. And the point is this is the wife betraying the husband. Now, I'm sure a lot of people could say criminality, national security, everything. And I'm sure people could make the other argument. I came out of there with a bad taste in my mouth. This is what the FBI does. And the January 6th case, and again, does people really think these are terrorists? I mean, there was criminal acts. I mean, some of these people should go to jail for.
But we just had it happen again. We just had it happen again, 3 days ago? And kid gloves were on this time. I don't wasn't an insurrection when these guys did it.
Exactly. I mean, I believe there should be slap on the wrist, couple days in jail. If you broke any property, pay for it. But terrorism, sedition, national security, no, I'm not buying it. And guess what? The FBI did the same thing. They're going and soliciting family members to betray other family members, to turn them in, your next door neighbor, this and that. And here's the
the Hitler Youth, right?
They will infiltrate all these groups. This is what happened to me. They infiltrated West Point graduates to spy on me. Here's the problem to the American people.
I'm not going to let that one go. I'm going to come back to that.
Oh yeah, please do. So let me give you an example. I was on wiretaps, as we can all imagine, sort of like the movies. There you are with the headphones, listening in on your subject. Now, criminal case, national security case. Let's go by the numbers. If it's a criminal case, let's just say drugs. We got a case open and we believe the guy's doing drugs. By law, if the conversation's being had, so we're listening in on his phone, who knows? He might be talking to his partner to ship in the drugs, or he might just be talking to his wife about who's going to take care of the kids that night. If it's not related to the crime, you're required by law to mute and then go back in, because it's not related to the law or to the crime. And it's very
just like when you have warrants and you go into a home. What are you looking for?
Exactly.
This is why it was so illegal what they did to Trump, because they got a general warrant and they just took everything and they looked everywhere, and that's illegal.
So here's my situation, what they're doing to me, because this is what the FBI does. If it is a national security case, what exactly is not intelligence? Everything is. Everything is. You're okay. You have a homosexual lover, or I don't know, you like to eat steak and eggs. Everything. It's intel. They'll collect everything on you, and then you're like, what the hell does that have to do with national security? The guy likes steak and eggs and he likes to eat at Denny's restaurant. They'll take everything. And the point is, this is it. Now, if I was a foreign national, I don't care. It is what it is. A U.S. citizen? No way. But that's how it is. And because those January 6th, they were not labeled as criminals. They were labeled as terrorists.
Seditionists.
My God, you're going to unleash the FBI on you now. Now they'll tap your phones or whatever, because that's what I say again, that's what people, when I look at my case, are like, what? It's amazing that as a U.S. citizen, it takes less evidence to go after a person if you're accusing them of being a terrorist or a spy than it would if he's a drug dealer or a bank robber. You think it's the opposite. You think you need more evidence. I mean, a terrorist is and look at the crime, that you go to jail. I mean, this is a very serious crime. But if you're a U.S. citizen and the FBI thinks, so your question is, what is the designator? It's called the flavor of the month, as we said in the FBI. What's the flavor of the month? And I'm telling you, that flavor has changed since I left. Now, I say again, we were looking at radical Islamic terrorists. I think most people could agree they're terrorists. I mean, if it walks like a duck's tongue, we could say, there were people, there are threats to lives. These people in January, and then I make the point: if these people in January 6th really wanted to be terrorists, don't you think they'd be probably locked and loaded? Meaning they probably had the potential to do a lot more damage if they wanted.
I believe the number one, they were basically taking guided tours through the Capitol, praying and singing Christian songs. A hell of a terrorist group. But the reason I believe they wanted them to have those optics as being radicals and violent and all these other, just misinformation they put out into the ether. Not that there weren't some violence, not that there weren't some people that were breaking windows, but what they didn't show you was true Trump supporters and conservatives on the scene telling the police officers, what the hell are you guys doing? Do something about this. This is not what we stand for. Over and over and over again. Then there were other people who were swept up into what was going on. And basically this crowd was pushing them and they ended up inside the Capitol. So there was all of these things going on. Also, I had friends that were on the ground and told me there were police officers there with masks on and badges weren't displayed or anything. They would come out into the crowd and they would, throw tear gas into the crowd, disappear, come back. They were agitating people, intentionally agitating people. And the fact that Nancy Pelosi had the option to have the National Guard ready and Trump made all the provisions for safety during that day and at that time, which they didn't take intentionally. And the Capitol police officers that were caught on video said as much as well. They set us up. So when you take all of these things, I mean, like if you had one of them, you could make an argument whether or not that's what happened. But then you have, 10 points of contention that all get check. I may not see the cake. I see you grab the flour. I see you grab the eggs. I see you grab the yeast. I don't have to see it. I know that you got all the ingredients for it. I know that's what you're doing. And that's what they did. And they used the optics that they created on the ground that day and the media who played along with it to try to label Trump as a seditionist. It was all in an effort to make sure he couldn't run for president again, even though he said in his own speech, peacefully and patriotically, make your voices heard.
Yeah, what you're going to find is it's true. This is sort of done in third world countries in terms of politics is dangerous in these third world countries, very dangerous. Not in America, right? Again, I think everyone could agree with me. When you grew up in America, politics growing up in America sometimes can be considered boring, right? No one paid attention. I think it was Trump who was the first one who actually put excitement and politics together.
For me, it was Ron Paul.
Yeah, Ron Paul, definitely. But now you're seeing there's excitement, there's danger, because you're realizing America, I'm telling you, it's going to get worse. And the FBI, if you think about it, you got to do reverse engineering. What is a tactic of terrorism? Fear, right? When you saw the 9/11 towers come, it's fear. It's people dying. It's fire, destruction. What's the opposite of the FBI? You step out of line and they think you're a terrorist. They're going to slam that hammer down so fast that you're going to be afraid. And now you're going to live in your own country paranoid. Now you don't know who to talk to, who's spying on who. Notice the East German Stasi. Maybe your best friend now is working for the FBI and you don't know it. Puts paranoia in you. But that paranoia is easier to control the citizens. Because I say again, just like a corporation doesn't like unions, a government doesn't like militias, any of these groups, like religious groups, any of these tight-knit groups, the government doesn't like. They're worried about it.
I'm not a fan of unions myself. And lately, I don't think that the people who are in unions should be fans of them either. I mean, that's a whole different topic. But, I mean, when they're talking about creating autonomous semi-trucks, ones that don't have drivers, but the truckers union is pushing for it. You just cut the worker out, and this push toward EV cars in the United Auto Workers unions pushing for that when they won't need as many workers to put together cars because they're just assembly line. It's you know, it's very, very, you know,
Let me-
it's a march towards socialism.
Have you noticed the ever-alarming 400,000 cell towers that have gone up in the United States alone? How about the electronics that reside in every room of our homes and Wi-Fi that runs 24/7? 5G cell phones are carried in our pockets hours on end. Common complaints are ringing in the ear: sleep deprivation, palpitations, headaches, memory loss, and so much more. Redemption Shield is on the cutting edge of offering products that protect your family from electromagnetic and microwave radiation. From Faraday bags, earthing bed sheets, Wi-Fi router covers, hats, scarves, bed sanctuaries, this will not be going away anytime soon. We will continue to see only faster speeds, 6G, 7G, and more exposure to EMF than any time in our history. Start protecting yourself now. Go to redemptionshield.com and get grounded and shielded today. Use code PATRIOT and save 10%.
Patriots, what you just saw was part 2 of this explosive interview with David Baumblatt, an ex-FBI agent turned whistleblower. And I am promising you that part 3 of this interview gets pretty hairy. And you're going to hear some things that are going to make you question everything that you ever thought about the agencies to which you believe are protecting you and protecting me and standing for law-abiding citizens and the freedoms that we enjoy in this country. It's up to you and I to hold these people accountable for the things that they do and the things that they don't do that they should do. And that's exactly what the Patriots Prayer is about. We're about engaging and getting involved in making a change. We love our country with all of our hearts. And we don't believe that right now, at this point in history, there are any neutrality left. You're either helping or you're hurting. You're either for us or against us. As we try to get our country back and we fight for the soul of our country. And we hope that people wake up and join the fight. Because if people wake up, write their congressman, get involved, sign petitions, do whatever it takes to make sure that your children are not being indoctrinated in the schools that they go to, that your elected officials do what they say they're going to do, and they keep their promise, and they keep their words, and they're not spending us into oblivion, and that they don't serve special interests, but rather they serve the people. And that is what we need to return to. That is what America stood for. Land of the free, home of the brave. And let's get back to it. So the silent majority, you need to stop being silent and stand your ground. We'll see you next time on the Patriots Prayer Podcast. You guys have a great day.
For speaking the facts. If you man enough, come stand with us, take USA back. And every time we pull up, all you